from an onboarding standpoint, between myself and our head of L&D, we alternate each week to come to join our new hires in their first hour in the company. And we talk about culture. We have someone from our L&D team respectively interview us and ask us, how does it show up? What does culture mean? How do we define it? What does that look like day to day? So that we're really, from the very second you walk in the company, making sure that that is a very prominent part of your experience.
Helen, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Nice.
How are you?
I'm good. I haven't got you up too early, have I? Because I know you're in the other side of the world. What time is it? What time is it?
It is 9:12. So no, this is living in California. This is really late. It's a very early get up exercise
I
type
noticed
culture.
that. It's like the opposite of the UK. It's literally the complete other way around. We work really late and start late. Do you prefer that?
I do. Yeah, I much prefer it. I feel like the day seems so much longer if you're up a lot earlier and
Mm.
go to bed earlier.
I
So
suppose you
yeah,
can like switch off a bit better, right? Because otherwise, I find that I'm working late and it's harder to switch off. If that makes sense.
yeah,
Like by the time
yeah,
I go to bed, I'm like I'm still wired with everything that's going on, and it's hard to turn off.
yeah. And
Uh,
especially before I moved here, I'd always worked for California-based companies, and so my day skewed really late. Even when the kids were little, I'd put
oh
the kids to bed
really?
and then work later so I would have as much overlap from a time zone perspective with the US. So yeah, so it's a real shift now.
Well, let's start and give everyone a bit of context. They're like, probably like, what's going on? Like, tell everyone a little bit more about your background and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chief People Officer of Rivian today. I just crossed my 4 year anniversary a week and a half ago.
Congrats.
Um, yeah, been a wild ride since joining Rivian. Prior to that, I was 3 years as Chief HR Officer with Atlassian, the B2B software space, very much team collaboration software. Prior to that, I was 2 years with Sonos. So, when your brand is all about filling every home with music, it's a wonderful brand to be associated with. And that takes me to 9 years, and that's how long I've been in the
Wow.
US. And then prior to that, I was 4 years with Kantar. So that was my first taste of being a global head of HR based in London and more in the marketing services space. And then prior to that, I was with Yahoo and I lived in both London and Switzerland as part of that role. So yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. I could go back even further.
You're like, Chris, I don't want to keep going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
then it's just going to reiterate how old I am.
Did you choose HR? Did it choose you somehow along the way?
It chose me for sure. I did choose recruiting. I loved recruiting, and it was from doing the role of recruiting that I fell into HR.
Mm.
I was at Siebel searching for our head of HR for Europe, had shortlisted 3 candidates for that role. My boss came over to meet with the three to determine which person she was going to give the role to. We went out for dinner that night, and she said, I actually want you to do it. And I was like,
Whoa.
not an HR person. And she said, no, no, but I actually think you'll bring something different. And the thing that I had on my side at that time was that I'd established a really good relationship with the leaders in the European business. And so I didn't have to start building those relationships. I already had those in place. We had trust. And so then it was just a case of starting to learn the craft. And as you know, when you practice HR in Europe, the craft is far more technical because you have to be really comfortable in all of the jurisdictions in which you operate.
Hmm.
And so I attached myself to a law firm that we were working alongside to make sure that I could really go deep on the employment law side because I wanted to be technical competencies a measure of success for me. So I wanted to make sure that I was really credible, especially around all aspects of employment law.
Hmm.
And so that's then suddenly I found myself in the world of HR and have been doing it ever since.
If you look back now, kind of, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you also knew the business. Not only do you have
Yeah,
the relationships, but you truly understood how how do we make money,
yeah,
and
exactly.
that's something now we start talking about more so. So picking up a lot of the CPOs I speak to now don't have any background in HR.
Yeah,
Interestingly enough, L'Oreal, I just got back from hosting an event there. Stephanie, their new chief HR officer, was in their R&D sort of team for 10 years plus. Lauren Schuster, chief people officer of Lego, came from a sales and operations background, but they could pick up all of those things that you're sort of describing, but they understand the business, they understand people, and they surround themselves with a great team,
Yeah.
of knowledge experts, like, that have deep knowledge in these different areas. So it's kind of changed quite a lot, hasn't it, over the
Yeah.
years?
And I do think whatever discipline you're practicing, nobody is going to have the full suite of
No.
going deep in
Yeah.
every area. And so whether you're leading operations or leading sales or leading HR, you know where your capabilities lie, and then you know how to plug the gaps to bring in skills and capabilities that help round out, maybe where you fall short. And so, yeah, it's just a case of making sure you have the best possible team.
I know something you're super passionate about, which we'll get into now, is embedding culture. But
Mm-hmm.
before we get into that, I wanted to understand, how do you define it? Because I realize every person I speak to is a different response to
Yeah,
this question. So I'd love to hear from your perspective. What does culture mean to you? How do you define that?
yeah. Culture to me means the expectations of how you're expected to behave here. So whether that's the culture of your family, I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember as a kid going and having play dates or, hangouts with friends, and realizing that what was normal in their family might be different to what was normal in mine, like the practices and behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
or what is expected from a community or a culture or a country. Having relocated several times, it's clear that there are norms and cultures that are associated with a country that are different to others. And so for me, it's exactly the same in a company. So you come in and you very quickly assess what's expected here and how am I expected to behave and show up here. And that for me is culture.
As a great analogy, by the way, because I remember as a kid, first time I walk into the homes of my black friends, very different culturally versus my Indian friends versus my white friends, and you're like, oh wow. And you very quickly get to understand that this is a cultural thing and this is how things work, and it's
Yeah,
very different in my house than
yeah.
here, and vice
Oh,
versa.
sure.
Yeah.
I always had the strictest dad. So that's why when I used to go to other houses, I was like, wow, they get away with a lot more here
Yeah.
than I did. So
Yeah.
there was a different culture right there.
So when you think about that, how do you then define what culture you want to be at Rivian? What does that process look like?
I think there's something different about defining a culture when you are coming into a founder-led organization. And I've worked for several founders now and founder-led organizations. And I think when the founder is still in place and still leading the company, the shadow that that founder casts is a huge definer of how that culture then shows up. And so if I look at our founder and I look at the culture of Rivian, they're synonymous, right? So he's very humble, he's very optimistic, he's very compassionate, he's very idealistic, and he's very first principled. And all of those things are massive elements of our culture, and they're really defined by him. In the same way, if he was a very different type of human being, then we would have a very different culture. What you're trying to do is to make sure that those elements of the culture are embedded through everything that you do. It's incumbent on us then to make sure that when we're hiring, when we're onboarding, when we're performance managing, when we are thinking what our performance and reward elements are, those aspects of the culture are woven through every possible opportunity and moment that matters.
Give me a specific example of how you've done that. You mentioned some examples, but drill down a little bit more for us of what
Yeah.
that looks like.
So obviously hiring is the obvious one, because you're trying to make sure that anybody that's coming in is going to make the culture better. And so the thing that underlies a lot of the attributes of RJ is this notion of humility, putting we before me. And so what that means is when you're interviewing and assessing, you're really looking for that team player. You're really looking for someone where the team is going to be better because they've joined it, not hero type cultures where it's all about individuals, like diving and catching the ball. That's not what we're looking for. From an onboarding standpoint, between myself and our head of L&D, we alternate each week to come to join our new hires in their first hour in the company. And we talk about culture. and we have someone from our L&D team respectively interview us and ask us, how does it show up? What does culture mean? How do we define it? What does that look like day to day? So that we're really, from the very second you walk in the company, making sure that that is a very prominent part of your experience. When it comes to the quarterly, what we call recharge conversations, so this is where we sit down with individuals and we say, right, how am I doing? And we call it recharge. One, because there's obviously a real resonance with the brand and what we
Love it.
do. Also, because you want to feel recharged when you've had it, not utterly depressed. And
That's a good
so
point.
when we're sitting down and having those conversations, we guide those conversations to be as much about not only what have I done, but how have I done it? So the cultural aspects are part of the questions in the guide that we give all of our managers to say, as you're assessing Chris, is Chris doing what he's doing in service to our values, as opposed to doing what he's doing and breaking lots of glass along the way? So that's also deeply embedded. We just been through our calibration session determining promotions. All of the documentation when I'm submitting a promotion or anybody's submitting a promotion, we're asking as much about the how as we are the what. So again, this is just woven through everything. And you can have someone who's doing incredible work, but if they're also doing it, detrimentally towards the values and to the culture, then that's not going to be the thing that's going to get you promoted. If anything, it's going to be the thing that gets you an alternative role with another company.
No, I love that. And I love the fact that you've made it simple for the managers by giving them those questions and those resources, the guides. They've already got enough to deal with, right? So giving them the support and the guidance that they need to be having. And that in itself creates a culture, because they're always leading the conversations, looking through that lens. And then, as employees progress throughout the business, it's so embedded in their leadership. I'm just guessing. It's so embedded in the way that they lead, that also reflects and trickles down the organization.
And the vocabulary, Chris, very much part of our vocabulary are the words of our values. We have come together, stay open, ask why, zoom out, and over deliver. And, very regularly you're sitting in a meeting and someone just says, we just need to zoom out for a second, which means let's just get perspective. Or you'll have someone say, I think we need to stay open. We're not being open as much as we could, which is really trying to drive this first principles approach. And so that really is about forget what you know, forget what you've done before. Let's just stay open. There could be a better way. And I think that's the other thing when you have founders, because they don't bring, 20 years, 30 years of doing this in other companies, everything they do is first principles.
Yeah,
because
basically.
What's the right thing here, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think you made a really good point there. It's really important that we help create a common language to have the conversations. Because otherwise, there's a lot of times people mean the same thing, but they're using different language, and you can sort of misinterpret that, and it causes so many issues. Miscommunication are probably the sum of most issues in organizations as well, but you have that common language to be able to have that conversation. Everyone knows exactly what you mean, and you're on the same page. And to your point, especially within HR, you can't have a fixed mindset. It's moving so fast. You need to be agile. You need to constantly be pivoting. If you're not going to survive long in HR. Things are always changing. Things are always evolving. There's no such thing as anymore of this is just how we do things. That's not good enough.
And I think it's harder now, Chris, than ever before. We were talking as part of our leadership summit a couple of weeks ago. We were talking to our leaders that now is probably the hardest ever time to manage.
I agree.
Just because of the diversity of the workforce. But at this moment, we have 5 different generations within the workforce, 5 different generations with massively different expectations of what the company's role is to them. That means as a manager, you have to be incredibly ambidextrous in making sure that what may have worked for you 10 years ago, practicing as a manager isn't necessarily going to translate in the same way today. And so trying to make the role of the manager as easy as possible, just given the complex landscape in which they're operating, is incumbent on certainly us in our profession to be constantly seeking for simplicity.
How do you assess for that? What kind of questions? Because it's interesting. Because I'm interviewing at the moment for a couple of roles, and I'm finding certain people I'm meeting that have a lot of experience are coming in with very much a fixed mindset. I've done it for this many years. I know how to do it, but it's the opposite of what you're describing. You need someone that, okay, we value your experience, we understand that, but this is the way we work, and this is. It's sometimes I find it really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard because you can't always catch it when you're interviewing.
Yes,
You're
that's what I mean.
looking for it when
Yeah.
you're interviewing, for sure. And often it's a line of questioning that's about learning. Because if you are open and you don't believe that you have to just keep bringing the playbook from before to each company that you move, you're really trying to understand the appetite for learning and to make sure that there's not this dogmatic mindset that's going to prevent that from being the case.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking for a line of questioning that's around when did you fail? What are the sort of examples of where you came in with one perspective and you came out with another? Examples of where your team or a meeting have moved you from your existing position to a different position. So really looking for behavioral based interview questions that are looking for examples of where someone's perspective has been changed. Again, you could have someone who's incredibly good at answering, and then in the day-to-day practice, you're not seeing those things exhibited, but you're trying to really weed that out if you can.
One of the things I was thinking about while you were talking, because I think when we first spoke, you were growing so quickly, and you can probably give our listeners an idea of that. On that
Yeah,
point, then, how do you retain the culture as you scale so fast?
it's challenging, that's for sure. And again, to put it into perspective, when I joined 4 years ago, we were just coming up between sort of 700 to 1,000 people coming up to the end of 2019. In 2020, we went from 1,000 to 3,500. In 21, from 3,500 to 10,500,
Wow.
and halfway through 22 to 16,500. So we went from 1,000 to 16,500 in about 2 years and 8, 9 months. The challenge during that time, which all was during COVID, by the way, because only in some of our environments were you physically able to observe the culture. Because when I went, you asked me the question at the beginning, like, how do you define culture? Well, it's like, what's expected here? And the examples you and I cited were things that we could see,
Mm.
right? Suddenly we're in this remote environment, other than at the plant where people were physically proximate, and some of our other design and building and testing, a lot of our maker type roles were very much in the office because they had to be. Massive percentage of people were sitting at home. So we weren't able to visibly see culture. We were having to just try and taste it through any Zoom interactions we were having. And I think it's Simon Sinek was saying about the challenge with COVID is that, a lot of the culture and relationships are built at the interactions that happen between the meetings. You took away the opportunity for that through COVID. So extra challenge that you're doing it in a remote first environment. And so we had to make sure that all of the things, whether it was the onboarding or the recharge or the total reward or the bi-weekly all hands, was a major driver for us. And so during that time, through a combination of RJ every second Friday morning, in fact, during the wild times of COVID, it was every Friday morning. And then when we started to get a little steadier in our growth, it became every second Friday morning. Would sit down and just do a very intimate talk update to the whole company. Every single all hands, every single all hands, he would talk about culture, and he would talk about what's important and what's prevalent and what we need to work on and what we need to tweak. And so that was massively infused throughout the company. And then again, it put a lot of pressure on us that all of those programs and practices and everything that was symbolic was also reinforcing the culture. So that whether you were a service center person sitting out on the East Coast getting ready to service vehicles, or whether you were sitting in the plant, or whether you were designing the future vehicle, or whether you were a software engineer figuring out how to, unlock the potential of the technology in the vehicle, that their understanding and how they would play back and define the culture if they were asked the question would be entirely consistent. And that's what we were really trying to drive towards. such that the cultural aspects almost became verbs that we used. My example of let's zoom out or let's stay open, they just became part of our language that,
Hmm.
that everybody's using all of the time.
It's interesting because you mentioned that because now we kind of realize that that is the glue, isn't it? Especially when you have a hybrid workforce, the culture is the glue that holds that all together. Because I thought, and you have to be intentional about how that shows up in every part of the employee life cycle
Yeah.
along the way. Like zoom into every single part and be like how you have to be super intentional because, as you said, in the office it just happened.
Yeah.
Like the you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
the water cooler conversations, between meeting conversations, but that doesn't work the same way remotely. If you're not intentionally making sure that's embedded into every system, processes, conversations, all hands, it just doesn't happen.
Even like your reward programs, we decided early on. And again, I remember a really early line of questioning with RJ when I joined, which was how do you think about pay and how do you think about performance and how do you think about, reward? And that led us to have a bonus program that is about collective success. So going back to that we versus me,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes you have these highly collaborative cultures, and then you look at the setup of the rewards
It doesn't
programs,
match. Yeah.
very individualistic, right? I am
Yeah.
going to track all of you in order to get the best bonus possible. Why is the penny not dropped on that? Because it's us against the competition. It's not us against each other. And so, yeah, the reward systems really have to also reflect your culture.
Yeah, I think another version of that I spoke about recently at one of our events was if you want your leaders to become talent exporters and not just talent importers, they also have to be incentivized the right way, right? So if you're saying, hey, we want to grow leaders that develop talent that can leave and work in other parts of the organization, then you have to incentivize them that way. So when it comes to looking at the leadership review at the end of the year, say, oh wow, Chris has been developing great talent, and is all and that's just moved throughout the organization and to different parts of the business, and you have to reward that. If you're not rewarding it, they're like, well, I don't want Chris to go anyway. I don't want to let he's staying on my team. He's a great performer.
It has to be that you're rewarding people to put the company as priority number one, and then the function and the team and the individual follow there.
Yeah.
It's like solving at the enterprise level, like real enterprise collaborators, enterprise thinkers, system
Hmm.
thinkers, and everything has to support that.
What are some of the leadership challenges when you're scaling so quickly?
Yeah, there's a really obvious biggest one, and that is the types of leaders that survive and thrive in this type of environment. So when you're small and you're looking out as to where you're headed, the destination is obviously to be a significantly bigger company. The types of leaders that you believe you need are obviously types of leaders that have done jobs in significantly bigger companies. And so we spent a lot of time looking for leaders that had worked at scale, went out and brought in some leaders that had worked at scale and realized that if they'd only worked at scale but hadn't worked scaling, so building and trying to do all of the things at the same time, they were really struggling to survive and thrive in this environment. And so our biggest learning has been that the types of leaders that work in this environment are leaders that have operated at scale, but also done the building. And so the analogy I always use during interviews is, there are examples of people that moved into a home where the home really didn't need a lot of work. They maybe just needed to decorate the bedroom or redo the kitchen. That's working at scale. There are other people that bought a plot of land and went and got an architect and decided, I want to build something from scratch. And so my questions are around when did you do examples of both of those things?
Oh, I love it.
Because those things are required to be successful here, because you have to build the architecture. And if you've only worked in that house that was already built, that's already been done for you. And you've never had to really do the context switching required in an environment like this.
How did you find it? I'm gonna turn that on you because I find I speak to many CHROs that go from working at the IBMs, the Walmarts, etc., to then being CHROs in CPOs in startups and really struggle for the exact reasons.
Absolutely.
There's someone who came to mind that called me like 3 weeks into they were so excited. They went from 100,000 plus employee company, a CHRO, to a startup, and they called me a couple of weeks later. I can't do this. all of the day-to-day heavy lifting, you're doing everything. Like you're saying, you're building the whole house, the foundations, the water, everything, all of it. How did you find that when you went from large organizations that you described at the beginning to all of a sudden now you're in a startup environment?
I would say the thing that I had to my advantage was that the bigger companies that I'd worked in through very fast scale times. So whether it was Siebel, whether it was the amount of change that we dealt with at Yahoo, the steadier state company was definitely Kantar because we had about 35,000 employees during my tenure there as head of HR. Then when I left Kantar to join Sonos, my HR team at Kantar was bigger than Sonos, the company. It required you then to be very much into the day-to-day and very much into the details. I didn't really find that too challenging because I felt like I'd never really worked in an environment where things had been really steady and slow and predictable. I'd always been in some kind of build environment.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So that transition didn't ever feel that challenging. And so by the time I came to Rivian, which has definitely been, the scaling opportunity of my career, just in terms of the pace and speed at which we scaled, I had to draw upon all of those experiences in order to do what I needed to do here and build my first team, my direct reports, who had also done the same. And again, I'm just really fortunate to have a team that in any given day, we can play at 30,000 feet or 2 feet off the floor. And that context switching, one, it's really exhausting. And two, it's not for everybody. It really isn't for
No, it's
everybody. And
not.
so, you're trying to weed out almost, I was interviewing somebody yesterday and I spent 10 minutes almost trying to put them off. And if they were still interested, then we can pivot to selling because it just isn't for everybody. And you almost want it to be a repellent as much as you do for it to be an attraction.
That's such a really good point because it's not for everyone, is it? I tried to say that to my friends who want to be entrepreneurs. I'm like, you don't understand. It sounds glamorous, it sounds great, but when you are dealing with everything, sales, marketing, operation, production, people, recruiting, like you name it, it's there. And it's not for everyone to do that. And
It's not.
yeah, I've realized that I've made some mistakes in hiring early in where I've hired people that have really come in, at super high level strategic, but aren't willing to get down and dirty. They're like, oh, okay, now I'm here, Chris, and you're paying me a huge sum of money. Where's all my team? And I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
need you to do that. We're a startup. We don't have the resources like in your previous team to have 10 people working for you to do all of those. And they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, oh, why did I not see this in the interview process?
And that's a humility thing too, right? Because there's sometimes not necessarily always a capability issue. Sometimes there's just a mindset. Like, I don't want to be doing like this is a will, not a skill thing, right?
I
I
agree.
could go down and do some of the details, but I'm at this late stage in my career now where I don't want to do that. So, you're also trying to define, is this a skill or will?
You've mentioned first principle thinking quite a few times, and I'm aware that not everyone may not understand what we're referring to. That could you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, one of our heads of brand described it, I think, in the most simplistic way, which is forget what you know. Forget what you know, which is really hard. Forget what you know.
Really hard.
So the idea of first principles, and it's a very engineering term where you really are coming and starting from a blank sheet and you're saying, right, first of all, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Align on what that problem is and forgetting what you know and what you've done before, determining what's the right way to solve it here. And when I did the welcome to the new hires this week, I was talking about first principles and talking about, this is a pretty torrid time in the world right now. We have all of the things that are going on in the world. We have geopolitical issues, we have wars, we have socioeconomic issues, all that have an impact on, first of all, how we feel coming to work every day. But also, secondly, decisions that may have worked 6, 12, 18 months ago may not be valid today. And so you're constantly taking all of that context into consideration and saying, I've never done it on this day with this context. And so I don't have the answer. And I think if you can just keep reminding yourself of that, you will have far more of a first principled approach than just assuming you can bring what you've done before and it's going to work today.
How has that impacted the way you personally lead and look at building a HR function?
It's harder the longer you do this because you assume that you've seen every possible permutation of what's going to happen, or oh, I've seen that before. So first of all, it's almost a swear word at Rivian when someone says, well, when I was at so and so.
I can imagine. No, 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 no. Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
the door's shut, the blinds come down, somebody comes and ties your hands behind you. So it's not a saying that you ever hear. So my team has got around it by saying things like, well, in a previous life, because we try and like look for other terms that
That's
don't say
hilarious.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that's not in our vocabulary. That's for sure. So one thing is you just don't have that in your vocabulary. I think the other thing for me is treat your curiosity equal to your knowledge. And I think oftentimes you want to be doing a lot more monologue than dialogue. And so it's being very conscious of saying, what am I not thinking about? What have I not considered? And they're just sentences that I try and add onto when I maybe have had a point of view on something, or being conscious of holding back on my point of view to make sure that I solicit the points of view and perspectives of others before I divulge perhaps what my point of view is, because I don't want them to be inhibited by knowing what my perspective might be. So that's also something where I try and go last rather than go first.
Love it. Has that changed how you hire for your own team? Like how you traditionally hire people for your team?
Yeah, I think it makes you a lot more open to different experiences and different skills, because if you're thinking more that I'm hiring you for your skills versus I'm hiring you for your experiences, then you will look a lot broader into adjacent type functions and teams and industries in order to solicit the right people for your team.
One of the things that you spoke about before is the power of anticipation. Can
Yeah.
you talk more to that?
I owe this completely to Scott Griffin, who's on my team. So Scott is one of our senior business partners and incredible talent. Scott did a sort of a semi-white paper, but also pulled some other papers together that talked about the power of anticipation. And he did that at a time when, if you think about when I joined the company and Scott joined about 6 months after I did, and we were at that time, Chris, we had no products on the road. So all of these products were in development and hadn't yet been manufactured. So we were anticipating the launch of the R1T, the launch of the Amazon vehicle, and then the launch of the R1S. We were also anticipating going public and all of the buildup that goes with getting your company ready to IPO. And so every morning you woke up with this laundry list of things that you were excited about because you were anticipating. The challenge was when you have that level of anticipation, it was so high because there were these huge milestones that were all coming, that when you start to hit off those major milestones, and especially in a business like ours, where the time to develop a product is extended because you have a very complex product that you're developing, the challenge becomes how do you maintain that same level of excitement and anticipation when the next product isn't going to be ready until 2025. Now we'll launch and show the world it in 2024, but that's a couple of years time frame between our last products hitting the market and our next products hitting the market. And so you're trying to think about how do you create those same levels of excitement and anticipation through smaller milestones during a time where you're waiting for those bigger milestones to hit.
Yeah.
And it was just such an insightful white paper around how to think about that and how excited we'd all been because of all of this thing, the stuff that we were looking ahead to. A bit like when you're packing and getting excited for a holiday,
That's
the
true.
anticipation of going can often be more fun or a night out than the actual experience itself. And so it's just taking that same mental model and applying it into how to keep people inspired in an organizational setting.
Yeah. I feel like we can apply that to all parts of our life,
For sure. For sure.
not just professionally, but also personally.
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
I always think getting ready for a night out can often be so much more fun than the night out
Well,
itself.
yeah, when I see my wife and her friends at my house getting ready, yeah, they're having a whirl of a time before they go out. I'm like, go out. It's like 11 p.m. We're still here. They're still partying in the house. No, no, I agree. And listen, I love the journey you've been on, and I know we've also made it sound like it's been really easy, but I'm sure it's been tough. What's been sort of the biggest challenges that you've faced personally in this journey?
I think probably just the sheer time commitment and investment to certainly at Rivian to get ready to what we needed, all of the milestones that we had to
Yeah.
that we had. And I always describe it as, especially when you're in the early days and you're building, you have to be very, very conscious and intentional of the day is where you work in the business because you haven't got all of those people to delegate to. So you're getting pulled in to more tactical work that you otherwise wouldn't be involved in. So you're in the business. But then at night, you have to work on it. Because
Wow.
at night, you then have to take the time to say, right, in order for me not to have to do that again, what are the capabilities and leaders that I need in my team that I can start to delegate that work and apportion out where that work should reside? The people that fail in this environment get so consumed by working in it that they don't carve out the space and time to work on it. And I think when the days are so full, that has to be at night. And I say at night, evenings and weekends, but I think that the tough thing was doing the work while doing the build and the time investment required to do that.
What would you wish you would have known going into this?
I wish I'd have known that, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious, but taking your time to make sure that every hire that you make is a hell yes, a hell yes. Because if it's a yes, a good, and it's not a great, phenomenal hell yes, it's a no. And I would say that that would be the advice I would give myself and the advice I would give everybody else who's hiring and building a team.
And where can people connect with you if they want to reach out and say hi?
Probably the best way is LinkedIn
Yeah,
is the best way to get hold of me. So yeah, very open to anybody who wants to reach out.
amazing. Well, firstly, thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate you sharing your journey and experience. Everyone listening, all of those links are below. If you want to go connect there as well. And I'm super excited to get my hands on a Rivian whenever you're here in Europe as well. Like since I first saw it came up on my YouTube suggested videos a long, long time ago, I was like, wow, what an incredible organization. And then, of course, the work you did with Amazon to obviously build. I see the delivery trucks everywhere, all over the UK. People probably aren't even aware of that. They will be now after they hear
Yeah, they will be now.
after they
And
hear this
there's
episode.
also, and
Yeah.
Chris, there's also some footage where Freddie Flintoff drove an R1T on Top Gear. So
Mm-hmm.
you can track that down and find it, which for me as a Brit, Top Gear is,
Of course.
Bible of anything to do with vehicles. So that was very exciting when that happened.
That's a big moment. Anyone in the UK watches Top Gear knows, right? Actually, global. It's global, to be honest.
Global.
It's global. Listen, I wish you all the best until we next speak, and all the best until then. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Chris.